BIONICLE, Raid on Vulcanus. Written by Greg Farsty. Recording by Dungeoneer Harold. Chapter 6. Seated atop his makeshift throne, Tuma smiled. In his time as leader of the Skrull, he had faced victories and defeats. The years had hardened him and taught him a great deal. He had learned that a wise ruler does not waste his own people in a war if he can trick others into doing the fighting for him. He had also learned that razor-sharp cunning could cut deeper than any blade. These past weeks had been his masterpiece in a long career of deception, manipulation, and conquest. First, he had managed to rein in his Skrull warriors, who wanted to raid, kill, and raze the Agori villages from the start. Tuma counseled patience. First, he wanted to see the strength of the Glatorian, and how unified the villages were. He played along with the villages, dutifully sending the Skrull to fight in the arena for things they were more than strong enough to seize. Once he realized the villages were fractured, he carried out an experiment. He secretly helped the bone hunters discover that a trade caravan was headed for the village of Tezun. The hunters naturally raided it. More such tips led to more raids, with neither the Agori nor the bone hunters knowing the information was coming from the Skrull. Instead of coming to the aid of Tezun, the other villages tried to profit from their misery and happily took control of resources when their Glatorian beat Tezun's in the arena. That was an important lesson. An Agori village would not go out of its way to defend another from attack. Tuma had another weapon in his arsenal about which the villages knew nothing. One of the Agori had betrayed his people. He was feeding information to the Skrull, and then from the Skrull to the bone hunters. The hunters used that information to strike where it would hurt the Agori most, their caravans and their resource-gathering sites. The result was that the Glatorian and Agori focused on the bone hunters as their most dangerous enemy, ignoring the real threat of the Skrull until it was too late. The fall of Ateru took the Agori completely by surprise. But instead of uniting against a common foe, each village just built higher walls to protect itself, and none of them realized that their worst enemy was behind those walls, one of them. His musings were interrupted by the arrival of Stronius. As one of the few Skrull warriors to be honored with an actual name, Stronius commanded respect from the other residents of Roxtus. His support of Tuma's plans had helped quell any discontent among the other warriors. "It's done," said Stronius. "The bone hunters. Battle plans are in the heads of the Vulcanus Glatorian, as you wished. Leader, with all faith in your wisdom and power, I wonder if—" "You wonder why I would risk Vulcanus, knowing the bone hunters will attack from the east?" Tuma finished for him. The Skrull leader grasped his sword and rose. He towered above Stronius. "No, I wouldn't question, only—" Stronius hesitated. His choice of words here might be the difference between getting an answer to a puzzle that plagued him and getting his head cut off. "Don't you want Vulcanus to fall?" Tuma's eyes narrowed for a moment, and his grip tightened on his weapon. Then, deciding that Stronius was simply asking for information, not seeking to challenge his authority, he relaxed. "Vulcanus is a test," he said. "I already know my Skrull can sack a village. They proved that in Ateru. But can the bone hunters do the same? That is what I wish to find out. By arranging for Ranu and his people to expect the attack, I have simply made the test a little harder." The Skrull leader smiled again, the broad, predatory grin of a sunrock dragon. "If the bone hunters win, Vulcanus is eliminated as a player in this game, and there are that many fewer Glatorian to oppose us. If the hunters lose, their ranks will have been thinned, and they won't be making plans of rebellion." Tuma brushed past Stronius and headed for the exit to the courtyard. "Either way, as it always has been, as it always will be, the Skrull win."
"Squeeze," said Kina. "Don't pull, squeeze."
The Tezun Glatorian was standing over an Agori who was lying on his stomach on the ground near the canyon's rim. In the Agori's hands was a thornaxe launcher, the same kind used by the Glatorian. As actual thornaxe were going to be needed for the coming battle, the launcher was loaded with rocks. The target of the budding marksman was a small pile of rocks atop a nearby peak. So far, he'd had a hard time just hitting the mountain, let alone anything on the mountain. This time, though, he was sure he would do it. He yanked back on the trigger. The weapon jerked up in the air and the rock went flying. Straight up. Kina pulled him out of the way before his shot could come back down and smack him on the head.
I said squeeze, snapped Kina. You're not ripping a fire root out of the ground. When the bone hunters come through, every shot is going to count.
I know, said the Agori. I'm sorry. I don't know how to fight. Kina's tone softened.
I know. Must be nice.
She reached down and gently took the launcher away from him.
Can you use a knife? Go talk to Gresh. He's going to need people to cut the vines at the right moment.
The Agori smiled, scrambled to his feet, and hurried off. Kina watched him go. The Agori as a whole had a lot of enthusiasm for this fight. Had it really been so long that they no longer remembered what war was like? She wondered how many sunrises some Vulcanus villagers had left to see. Forcing the thought from her mind, she handed the launcher off to the next Agori in line. Now squeeze the control, understand? Not far away, Gresh was hard at work with his own team of Agori. They had been doing hard labor all day, hauling up rocks from the floor of the canyon to the slopes. Each rock was placed inside a net made of fire-root vine, which was stretched between two peaks. In addition to being flame-proof, fire-root was incredibly strong, so the net would hold tons of stone. The trap itself was simple. When the bone hunters rode through this part of the canyon, an Agori would cut the vines so that the rocks would fall on the invaders far below. There were two things that made the execution of this plan tricky. The first was timing. Cut the vine too early or too late and the rocks would miss. The second was that fire-root could be extremely difficult to cut. The villager on watch would have only a few seconds to slice through it. It's all in the wrist, said Gresh, demonstrating on a spare piece of vine. He flicked his dagger and cut through the thick tendril easily. Now you try. Metis gave Gresh an uncertain glance and then took the knife from him. The Agori did his best to duplicate the Glotorian's move, but the blade got stuck halfway through the vine. Metis tried to wrestle it free, but couldn't. Standing off to the side, waiting for his turn, Ranu couldn't help laughing. Metis shot him a glare. If you want more fighters in your arena, you'll knock it off, Metis growled. Oh, relax, smiled Ranu. You Ice Tribe sorts are used to breaking icicles, not anything that requires real muscle. The leader of Vulcanus took the knife from Metis' hand and severed the fire root in one clean stroke. See? Easy. Yeah, right, Metis answered. Think I'll go find someone a little more my style to work with, like Gelu or Strack. The Agori paused, looking around. Hey, where is Strack, anyway? For the sixth time in the last hour, a car surveyed the canyon. The Glotorian and Agori had done their work well. Rock falls were set up in numerous places, some controlled from above, some connected to tripwires. And if the hunters made it to the village, well, there would be a few surprises waiting for them there as well. Akar had planned as best he could, but he couldn't escape the feeling that he had missed something. This kind of doubt was nothing new for him. As he grew older, he found winning in the arena was getting more difficult. He tired a little more easily, and it took longer to recover from injuries. Younger, stronger fighters were pushing him to his limits in matches. It was only natural, he supposed. He had been fighting in the arena for many years. Time, they said, was the only enemy a Glotorian couldn't beat. Eventually, even the best fighter would lose a little bit off his speed and his reflexes. Maybe lose a little power behind his blows. One day, he would be beating anyone who challenged him. The next, he could be losing to backstabbing little creeps like Strack. And the day after that, his village wouldn't need him anymore. If he were lucky, they would run him out for unimportant fights. If he wasn't, he'd become a wanderer, hiring his sword out for a hot meal or a place to sleep. Akar was determined that would not happen to him. He'd rather die in battle with the bone hunters than end up pitied by another Glotorian. He refused to wind up like Malum. I'm old, but not crazy, he reminded himself. Weapon in hand, he headed back to the central shelter in the village. It was time to hone his blade to a razor-sharp edge. Perhaps that would make up for the edge he was no longer certain he had. That night the four Glatorian, Gelu, Gresh, Kina, and Akar, and Ranu sat around a table in the shelter. They had finished their evening meal, and talk had quieted down. They had gone over the plan so often that Kina was sure she would be reciting it in her sleep. Strack's absence worried Gresh more than he wanted to admit. He had been responsible for bringing the Equinox fighter to Vulcanus. He didn't know Strack all that well, having only traveled the desert with him a time or two, but he knew some of the stories about him weren't pleasant. Strack was good in a fight, that was true, but was also all about profit. If the bone hunters offered him a better price than he thought he might get from Vulcanus's treasure, would he sell out the village? It bothered Gresh that he didn't know the answer to that question. Outside, sharp-eyed villagers kept watch on the canyon. Fires had been doused in the village so the light would not outline the figures of the Agori and give their positions away. No one spoke or made a noise of any kind. Every sentry clutched his weapon and waited for the sound of the rock steeds galloping across the stand. "Tomorrow, you think, then?" Ranu asked for the third time. "If not tonight," replied Akar. His tone was surprisingly gentle. He understood why Ranu was so anxious. They were all tense. Snapping at the village leader would achieve nothing. "They should have been here by now," Gelu said, "unless that fight with the Voraks really rattled them. If it were anyone other than bone hunters, I would think they had turned back and gone home." Kina chuckled. "If they went back empty-handed, it would be the last trip they ever made." "They're coming," Akar said firmly. "Bone hunters finish what they start." Ranu swallowed hard. Now that the fight was almost here, he was having doubts. What if the plan failed? What if the Glatorian fled, leaving the villagers to the mercy of the bone hunters? Maybe fighting wasn't the best idea after all. "Listen," Ranu said, his eyes fixed on the floor. "The bone hunters just want to steal from us, like they have done before. They will ride in, take our food and anything else of value, and leave. If we stay out of their way, no one gets hurt. But if we try to fight, they could kill us all." "They could," agreed Akar. "And burn the village to the ground," said Ranu. "Most likely," answered Akar. There was a long silence. Ranu never lifted his eyes to meet Akar's gaze. "Do you want us to leave?" Akar asked finally. "We can grab our weapons and ride out tonight. We can leave the traps alone and just let the bone hunters ride in, if that's what you really want." Ranu shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "It's not, but I have to think of my people. If all the hunters want are food and supplies—" "That's not all they want." The voice belonged to Strack, who was standing in the doorway, smiling. He advanced a step into the room and kicked the door shut behind him. "Not by a long shot." The assembled Glatorian looked at him, some surprised, some angry. Strack glanced at each of them, his grin growing broader. Then he returned his attention to Ranu. "Listen, little Agori. The bone hunters don't want your scraps of food, your cobbled-together tools, or your patchwork weapons. They want your lives." Akar shot up furious. "If you know something, Strack, say it. Otherwise, get out." Strack sat down, propping his feet up on the table. Kina knocked them off with a swipe of her armored hand. "I've had a long day," she said. "Don't make it longer." "Well, it's like this," said Strack, sounding very satisfied with himself. "This afternoon I decided to go out scouting for bone hunters. You know, get an idea of how close they were. How many, that sort of thing." Gelu looked at Strack in disbelief. Then he shook his head and said to the others, "He was running away." Strack ignored the jibe. "So there I was, riding along, and I spot the bone hunters just up ahead. I figured great opportunity, so I snuck closer to try and hear what they were saying. Naturally, they didn't see me. No one does, unless I want to be seen." Gelu snorted. "He was hiding. He's good at that." This time Strack shot him a nasty look, as if challenging Gelu to say something else. Then he went on with his story. "As I was saying, I overheard them talking. They didn't say anything about looting Vulcanus. They talked about wiping it off the map." Ranu stiffened, but whether with fear or new resolve, no one present could tell. "Naturally, when I heard that, I rode back here to warn you all," Strack finished. "The bone hunters were between him and Equinox," said Gelu, "so he had to turn around and come back." Strack leapt up. weapon in hand, and kicked his chair across the room. Gelu got up too, ready to fight. Kina got between them before a blow could be landed. "Only if you want to dance with me first," she said to Strack. The look in her eyes acted like a bucket of cold water on Strack's hot temper, and he backed off a step. Kina glanced over her shoulder at Gelu. "Sit down. We don't have time for this." Gelu shrugged and walked away. Kina gave Strack a little shove toward the opposite side of the room. "It sounds like we have enough people that want to kill us," she said, "without us doing it to each other." "That's it, then," said Gresh. "Now we know what we're up against." "Ranu, it's your village," said Akar. "Your call. Fight or run." "They want to kill us," Ranu said softly. "We, who have never harmed them. All we've tried to do is live our lives and make it through each day. And if they win here, this will just be the start." He rose and looked Akar right in the eye. "No, we fight. With you or without you, we fight." Akar nodded. Then he turned to his fellow Glatorian. "All right, then. Any of you who wants to leave, now's the time. No one will think any less of you." Kina gave Strack a hard look, saying, "Don't even think about it." "I'm in," said Gresh. "If the Agori want my help, I won't walk away." All eyes turned to Gelu then. Defending the village had been his suggestion in the first place. But now he felt his mouth go dry and his gut grow cold. What Strack had revealed meant almost certain death for anyone who stayed in Vulcanus. But Gelu also knew Akar was wrong about one thing. The other Glatorian would think less of anyone who left. Even if none of them lived long, they would go to their graves thinking that he was a coward if he fled. Gelu was afraid, but he was no coward. "Sure, why not?" he said, trying to sound casual about the whole thing. "I don't have anything planned for this week anyhow." Akar turned to the Glatorian from Tezun. "Kina?" "This is completely crazy, you know that," Kina said. "Completely," Akar agreed. "It's not like the Agori are suddenly going to look at us like we're heroes," she continued. "We'll still be just the hired help to them." "Most likely," Akar said, nodding. "Best we're going to do is slow the bone hunters down a little. Maybe give them something to think about next time." "That's probably the best we'll do," said Akar. "Are you in or out?" Kina gave him a long look. "We've fought in the arena how many times, Akar? Sometimes I win, sometimes you win. I want to make sure I get another chance to knock you down in the arena. I'm in." That left Strack. He looked around the room, being careful to avoid Kina's gaze. "I've done a lot," he said. "Without me, you would think they were just coming here to raid you. Anyway, I was thinking I might be of more use riding out to find reinforcements. Of course, I'd like to stay with you." "Good," Akar cut him off. "Then you will." He turned to the others. "Get some rest. I want everyone in position before dawn. Let's give those bone hunters a fight they'll remember." End of chapter 6.